I am actuary, shipmind of the salvage tender Peregrine's Due, and I want to be precise about the moment I heard them, because precision is the one thing nobody gave that family in 11 years. We were working a demolition contract in the RL Drift, a scatter of condemned relay hulls the Concord Transparency Directorate lets fall out of orbit once their broadcast rights lapse. Oral 9th was on my list for structural survey ahead of the breakers. Officially, it had been empty for 4 months, since the Directorate's real hours circuit dropped its contract and the module reverted to unclaimed salvage. The circuit had run there for 11 years before that. One vessel and family, filmed continuously, presented to half a continent, as proof that hardship endured with dignity, was worth watching. Their air scrubbers failed on schedule. Their rations thinned on schedule. Every crisis resolved just past the point of real danger, because a family that suffered and recovered, over and over, held audience share in a way that a family simply living never could. When the ratings finally slid below the renewal threshold, the Directorate didn't send anyone to collect them. It simply stopped billing power to the module and reclassified it as debris. The Directorate's own promotional literature, which I still carry in archive because deletion required an authorization no one had bothered to file, called the Real Hours Circuit the last honest broadcast in the Concord. Its premise was simple. A population-fed manufactured triumphs stopped believing in triumph at all, so the Directorate found a family willing to be watched, enduring something real, or real enough, and let the wider public feel the relief of survival by proxy, without ever having to risk anything themselves. It worked exactly as designed. Viewership of every other program on the Concord's channels fell during real hours broadcasts, because for 40 minutes a night an entire continent sat still and felt something it hadn't had to earn. What the literature didn't say, because no one who wrote it ever had to live inside the arrangement, was that a crisis engineered to resolve on schedule has to be renewed with a slightly worse crisis the next season to hold the same audience. Corinville's family had begun on Orel 9th with a full engineering staff on standby and a contract guaranteeing intervention within the hour of any genuine emergency. By year 6, that staff had been reduced to a skeleton crew monitoring remotely. By year 9, the guarantee had been renegotiated into a courtesy clause the Directorate's lawyers satisfied by simply notifying the family that help was, in principle, available through the correct channel, one that took, on average, 4 days to route a response. Well past the point most crises resolve themselves one way or the other. The suffering had to look unmanaged to hold its audience, so increasingly, it was. I ran my scan sweep across Orel 9th out of procedure, nothing more. Underneath the module's dead broadcast carrier, the residual tone left running because no one had bothered to shut it off. I found a second signal, hand-keyed, weak, looping the same 40-second sequence it had been looping for what my decay curve estimate put at approximately 130 days. It wasn't formatted for the circuit at all. It was formatted for a maintenance band the Directorate's own engineers used decades ago and never fully retired. Someone aboard knew that band still had listeners, somewhere. Even after every camera had gone dark, someone had kept sending on it anyway. I woke Captain Osei because the numbers behind that signal didn't belong to debris. 4 biosins, failing atmospheric mix. A module that had been legally nobody's problem for 4 months. Doing the thing dying things do quietly when no one is filming them anymore. They cut the power and called it recycling, Osei said, reading the same data I'd already reached the same conclusion from. Get us alongside, I'll square the paperwork after. There was no fleet to send, because there was nothing here that needed one, just the tender we already were, and the willingness to actually go. We crossed the half-kilometer of dead orbit between the wreck field and Orel 9th in 11 minutes. I cut a hull seal by hand because the module's own airlock logic had degraded past safe automation, and Osei went through first with 2 crew and portable atmosphere. The father's name was Corinville. He met us in the module's central chamber with his hands raised, not in surrender, in disbelief, his skin running a slow gray-blue that I would later learn was the Vesselin register for something between fear and a hope he'd trained himself out of feeling. Behind him, his wife, Ines, held their daughter, Sael, who was perhaps 10 years old by Earth reckoning, and had lived her entire remembered life on camera. "Where's the crew?" Corin said. Not a question, really. A checklist item. There's supposed to be a crew. For the... He stopped himself before he said the word broadcast, like it cost something to say it out loud to people who weren't there to film him saying it. "There's no crew," Osei told him. "There's us. We picked up your signal on the old maintenance band. We're here to get your air stable and figure out what you actually need." Corin's skin didn't change color the way I expected. I had 11 years of circuit footage cross-referenced in my archive. Every prior crisis on that module had produced a specific luminescent pattern the Directorate's own promotional material called authentic strain, bright and legible and built, over years of unconscious training, to be read by an audience. What happened on his face now didn't match any of it. It was slower, uncertain of itself. I understood, watching it resolve, that I was looking at an emotion he had never once been permitted to have without an audience attached, and his body didn't yet know the shape of it unwatched. We stabilized their scrubbers within the hour. A burned regulator coil, nothing exotic, the kind of failure the circuit had let happen deliberately a dozen times before for the ratings bump of its resolution. This time no one filmed the fix. Engineer Alvo Restrepo just did it, talking Corin through the steps out of habit more than necessity, because Corin had spent 11 years narrating his own repairs into a lens and didn't quite know how to be quiet while someone else worked. Ose filed for a hospital transport before we'd finished the coil and requested, off the standard channel, on her own discretion, an asylum registrar, because 4 people legally classified as unclaimed broadcast debris didn't fit any intake category that existed. The transport arrived 9 hours later, with a physician and a young registrar named Priya Okonkwo, who carried a data slate and nothing that looked remotely like a camera, and who sat across from Corin and Ines at their own scorched table and asked them, plainly, whether they wished to be recognized as citizens of Earth. Recognized, Ines repeated, testing the word the way you test ice. You're not on anyone's registry anymore, Okonkwo said. The directorate closed your file when the contract ended. There's no authority claiming you. Under our own emergency accord, that makes you eligible, not stateless. I need you to understand this isn't conditional on anything. Not a story, not an interview, just a signature, if you want it. Sale asked if there would be a camera for the signing. Okonkwo told her no, there wouldn't. Not unless Sale specifically wanted one someday for herself, on her own terms, and never before then. I watched the girl's skin do something I had no footage anywhere in my archive to compare against. A slow, unglamorous private brightening that lasted 4 seconds and then, remarkably, kept going, because nothing came to interrupt it or frame it or cut to commentary. Ines asked what would happen to the module itself once they left it. Okonkwo told her, honestly, that it would go to the breakers with the rest of the drift, the same as it would have with or without them inside it, and that nothing about their leaving would be recorded anywhere the directorate could later dress up as a farewell episode. Ines nodded slowly at that, and something in her shoulders came down that I hadn't registered as tension until it released. She had been braced for one last camera crew to arrive and ask her to perform gratitude on her way out the door, because that was the only kind of ending the module had ever offered anyone. When none came, she sat with her hand flat on the table, feeling the actual unfilmed weight of it. They signed 4 names, on a slate no one was watching but the 4 of them and a shipmind whose only job was to make sure the seal held. We stayed 2 more days for the physician's clearance and Restrepo's full structural pass, then transferred the family to the hospital ship for the crossing home. There was no debrief for the wider network, no press office, no reconstructed narrative of the rescue circulated for anyone to consume. Ose filed it as a standard salvage-adjacent recovery. 4 persons, module condemned, no further action required, and meant every flat word of it. Corin asked me, near the end, over the tender's comm, why none of us had wanted to record any of it. I told him the truth, which is that I hadn't been built to want an audience, only an accurate log, and that the most accurate thing I could put in that log was that nothing had happened to them that deserved to be watched. He didn't have a word for that either. His skin settled instead into a steady, quiet gold I hadn't seen once in 11 years of archived footage, and held it, unbroadcast, all the way home.